ready to experience the most transformative cosmic event of 2025? Mars Retrograde is not just a celestial phenomenon, it's a profound call to reset, rethink, and redefine your understanding of power and purpose. But this time, it's different. This Mars Retrograde will hit in ways we've never seen before. Join David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, a world-renowned celebrity astrologer, for an exclusive live event streaming on High Vibe TV. This isn't just another astrology event. It's an immersive experience that dives deep into the astrological and personal implications of this rare Mars retrograde. You'll gain insights and tools to fully embrace this cosmic shift and transform your life. David will guide you through the unique placements of Leo and Cancer during this Mars retrograde, the rare and impactful Pluto opposition, and much more. As always, expect special surprises and exclusive revelations that only the Leo King delivers. Discover how Mars retrograde impacts every area of your life, your love life, career, manifestation, and direction. Learn how to turn its challenges into opportunities for personal empowerment. Gain a new understanding of power, both personal and global, and how to truly harness it for your own growth. Have questions? You'll get the chance to ask David live during the Kanda session, or send your questions in advance to pr@highvibe.tv. Don't miss this opportunity to connect with the cosmos, understand its messages, and align yourself with the energy of the year ahead. From the Mars perspective, this is the beginning of a long period of Aries influence, and understanding it now is critical. Save the date, December 12th, 2024, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Streaming live exclusively on High Vibe TV. Reserve your spot today. Click below to join this one-of-a-kind live stream and embark on your cosmic reset. Premium Plus subscribers get this event included with their subscription. For others, the event is $19.99. Whether you join live or watch the recording added to your library, this experience will empower you for what's to come.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, the Leo King, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars with a 90-minute countdown. Try and make these shows a little bit more narrow. Of course, we're here on highvibe.tv. We'll be talking about apocalyptic fears, doomsdays, and all the little different witchcraft stuff that's all been going around in the cycles of time. What's going on? How are you doing, Ann?
I'm doing great. I'm surviving the bird flu over here in California, thanks to Governor Newsom. And that's about it.
Well, I mean, I think it's been great because, you know, we didn't even talk prior to doing today's show. It just came up in the last couple hours. But you really had some fascinating ways of like this drone situation going on right now. And you connected them with like witch drones that I thought was so cool. But there is this parallel in history of this big changes that happen in the world, which I think we've spent plenty of shows showing people through the Pluto cycles, Neptune cycles. I mean, there's been so many of these cycles that are bringing us back to these very extreme change points in history. And the phobias, I'll call them the phobias, come out, but there's so much of the religious ones, whether it was witchcraft, of course, or the apocalyptic aspect that comes through, whether it's biblical or other different religions. And then there's the doomsday stuff that comes up. And now it feels really similar, whether it's AI or drones and what's happening. And it's not to kind of belittle those fears, too, at the same time, I think, on both sides, would you say? I mean...
Right. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle anyone's fears about what's happening.
Yeah.
And it is disconcerting to have drones flying over the eastern seaboard and wherever else they are and wondering what in the world's going on, and then being told it's nothing, or that they don't know what it is, to it's nothing to worry about it. We do know what it is and it's okay. We don't know what's going on, but what I started to think about with the fear of, well, I guess not the fear, with the stories about the drones it's almost as if, depending on how you look at it, well, first of all, there are so many ways you can look at it, right? You can look at it from a conspiracy theory. You can look at it from, it's the rise of the surveillance state, and this is how it's being unleashed. Or it could be an enemy outside of our country, or it could be an enemy from within. We don't really know what it is. But there are so many stories ready to go about what it could possibly be. These could be aliens. It's Project Blue Beam, whatever it is, right? And so I started to think about, of course, as a historian, the Salem witch trials, and how when the fears about witches, when the witch trials broke out in 1692, it was only happened because it came after a long, long time of fears about witchcraft and what witches could have been doing in our society. So I started to think about, is that similar to how today the way we're interpreting drones is informed by years and years before this of us worrying about the potentials of what AI could do, what automated robotic intelligence might do one day. And so that's what started me thinking about the drones being the witches of today.
I love that, because it is very much a new world, so we have to look at things differently. Although the fear of witchcraft is peaking up again, too. So it is kind of interesting that just as much as there is the drone fear, if you just go online right now and you look in the spiritual community, how many over the last 2 years have you seen astrologers or tarot readers or anybody dealing with any kind of alternative spiritual practice other than traditional religions do the whole, I've left that because it's, whether it's demonic or it's witchcraft, and I've gone to the light, I've been baptized. We even see Russell Brand. He's a great example of somebody who spoke at Conscious Life Expo, was very spiritual, and now going that direction, right? So it is happening kind of on both levels again, but it is interesting because it's always that new part of history that's being written right now, and we're seeing it expressed in the drones, and it's like that question of, does it come from, the government, and that has a bad connotation to it. Like, there is no good part, unless it's the nuclear sniffing drones, but that's still a bad situation, that there's a nuclear, whether it's just nuclear material or a nuclear weapon missing, like that's a scary sum of all fears kind of moment. Or is it nefarious, like AI has taken over and there's another bad, nefarious, dark undertone to it, and a fear that it's going to take over, right? So it is interesting that the witchcraft thing we can't kind of kick out. And that could even be, because if I were to take it back prior to, let's say, even say Christianity, there's always been this, whether it's, because again, it kind of, a lot of it always in our day continues to go through this demonic understanding, but there is this, I guess, the light and the dark, right? There is the dark things, and then it's attached to so many different things, whether it's a dark looking tree or a black cat, or I guess in the Pharaoh's time, if somebody entered in and they were allergic to a cat, that was a bad sign too. So,
Yeah, that is interesting, because one of the things I was looking into was, when did fears of witchcraft first start to emerge in the period of time most recent to us? And looking into that, I found out that it was actually banished to talk about witchcraft and to connect it to manifestations in this world in the 10th century, I believe. So in the 10th century, the church made it so that it was against the church's teachings to even suspect someone of witchcraft, because it was called too superstitious to do that. And the reason for that was that there had been fears, or actually it had been thought that women could be flying around at night, right? Not on broomsticks necessarily, but this was a pagan belief that was associated with the temple of Diana, I think, with the goddess Diana. And it was thought that women who were affiliated with Diana could fly at night. So by the 10th century, I guess the church was tired of those pagan teachings or practices or ideas, and they said, no longer is witchcraft a thing. We aren't going to talk about it. That's a superstitious belief. Then it starts to come back in the 1430s, this belief in witchcraft. And at that point, I started to wonder, well, why did it come up in 1430? And actually, I still don't have, a concise answer about that, but we were looking at causes for that before we went on today. And, the Black Death is definitely one of the things.
Big time.
The plague causes so much upheaval and social change and changes in how people viewed the church. And so and also then the rise of the printing press, right? So now people can have doubts about the authority of the church, but they can also print about it, right? So you can spread misinformation of the 15th century much further at that point. And so that's at the point when you start to see the most publications that have to do with witchcraft. And I think I have a list of some of the books. I don't know if you can share it. So I just looked at books that have to do with the end times, with the coming apocalypse, because also after the Black Death, there were so many fears about the end of the world, the end times. And during the Black Death, obviously people thought that was the end times, and we've talked about that before. But here are some of the books that started to be written about witches. The first is this Johannes Nieder book that is one of the earliest systematic discussions of witchcraft, linking witches to the devil and the apocalyptic struggle between good and evil. So he was actually a Benedictine monk, I believe, and
was he German then?
He actually was from he was Germanic, but I think he was from the mountains, from the Alps, and so you see a lot of fears of witches coming out in these mountainous villages that were more cut off from the world, because that's where weird heretical ideas can thrive.
Well, in astrology, mountains, living on the ocean or living on the mountains, it's 12th house related, right? So that's actually the house. I know 8th house is ghosts and it can be all those fears based, but the 12th house is where the paranormal is, right? So it is very paranormal, and people can go a little crazy if you live too high in elevation, or if you're kind of by yourself on the coast, you can kind of go crazy.
So those isolated...
You want to be isolated, or valleys too. The 12th house rules those places.
Mm-hmm. And those were places that the church would have seen as they would have viewed them as more superstitious, because they were cut off from new ideas. And also, it's not easy for the church to serve those areas. And, I mean, the church was kind of breaking down at this time too. This is why Martin Luther starts to critique the church, right? So then the Pope there are also inquisitions that were forming at this time to persecute heretical beliefs, and one of them would have been witchcraft. And then the Pope passes his first papal bull in 1484. Now, after the church had denied witchcraft exists, at this point they're saying, no, it exists, and we condemn it as heresy. Then we have the Malleus Maleficarum. That's that famous witch hunters text. We talked about that at some point in one of our shows. And that was the most influential work that kind of was used throughout the next century in learning how to persecute and identify and persecute witches. But then it really intensifies with the Reformation. So that's
Right.
where when you start to introduce religious ideas into the whole mix.
And that's
It
that
gets crazy.
Pluto Capricorn coming into Aquarius, which is what we've been through right now.
And, you know, I always wonder, I think I mentioned this before, right? And we did talk about it when we looked at Salem. Neptune and Pisces, does that give
Yeah.
rise to a lot of crazy kind of, or fears about
Well,
the unknown?
yeah, because it was Neptune 19 degrees that that you and I did when we did your demonology series on High Vibe in 2020.
Yeah.
That we realized whether it was King James going after and writing demonology and demons or the Salem witchcraft, it was Neptune at 19 degrees. Didn't matter the sign. But it was interesting with Salem, it happened Neptune 19 degrees. And so using that from prior stuff I had done to predict during Trump's presidency, it would be about this going after witchcraft. And then he's saying like, I'm being treated like I'm a witch in witch trials. Remember he was saying that through his whole presidency. Mm-hmm. And he was actually just in the reoccurrence of the Salem witch trials. That was 2 times prior. But if you think of the witch trials that happened, I guess, in the cycle prior from 1848 all the way into the 1860 into 61, I would say that's kind of an interesting one that people are kind of determining who's good and who's bad. In the opposite way of like self kind of like ordaining themselves as their own popes in America. It was the freedom experiment of America of General Lee, for example. I'm ordained by God to protect the South and especially to protect slaves in order to let them have a better life because their life as slaves is better and it's ordained by God in me to protect them as general. So it's kind of like, but then casting the demons as the abolitionists, right? And Lincoln was the abolitionist who was not even extreme, right? He was not extreme, but he was kind of portrayed as the ultimate witch. And actually, without doing anything, the South secedes. So mind-blowing, that story.
I mean, but what I'm noticing when I look at this is that before you get to that Neptune and Pisces place, and it doesn't even have to be Neptune and Pisces where you have these scares, right? But the beliefs that flare up and the fears that come out have been building for years and years. And what I think is interesting about this, when I looked at this list, was I think the 1480s is that, and the 1430s where it starts is that Pluto in Cancer.
Yep.
So it's almost like if you look at this 15th century list.
That's like World War II coming into the forefront the last time we had Pluto in Cancer for our present time, right? So
yeah. Then so it's building and like the seed of it is there. Then you get to Pluto and Capricorn and it breaks out into these crazy things because Martin Luther, in making his attack on the church, he had a new translation of the Bible, and that's the first place where he identified the Pope as the Antichrist, right? So now you're adding this apocalyptic element to it. And it starts
Doomsday
intensifying.
scenario.
Yeah.
For some, they don't. Some people hear apocalyptic and they think that it doesn't have an attachment sometimes to that spiritual element to it. So, because I think it's been used so much in movies and so forth.
Yeah. So they're thinking of Armageddon.
Right. Exactly. But apocalyptic, and then there's Doomsday. Like there is this deep connection in religion, though. An antichrist part of the religion that's really the figurehead that's the marker in the prophecy that causes the other markers to happen.
Well, what happens is what I want to know is the 1530s is where it really gets crazy. We talked about this before, where there are rebellions that break out. There are weird sects of religions, they're just weird religious groups that go off and live in their own communities. Yes. I mean, there actually were some different ideas about sex and religion that popped up at this time too.
That's true.
Because a lot of these end of times groups went and lived in completely different ways because the end times were coming. But that really intensifies in the 1530s through the 70s, I would say. And that's also the era of a lot of religious wars. So
yeah, I mean, that's Pluto and Aquarius, right? Especially King Henry VIII, which we've covered many times. I mean, his true schism from the Catholic Church is what Martin Luther's work is 10 times, because it's an actual shift in the system of governance and the governing bodies of monarchs, and the first monarch to actually claim their own religion and completely make a full schism, and completely for all the way up until this most recent coronation of Charles III, CNE communication or even some sort of religious connection. I mean, complete bye-bye for 500 years. And then Charles III shows up, and the Pope gives him a piece of the true Christ of Jesus for his coronation.
You know, I thought about that during the whole Notre Dame. I always have to think how to pronounce it. That whole Notre Dame thing. How the Pope didn't show up, but William was there.
Or that Biden, who's the second Catholic president, wasn't there, but his wife was there.
Anyway, I'm sure that connects somehow to this. But anyway, I wanted to say that like following the Pluto thing, even though I know there's so much more than that, and I've been watching your Mars video, and so I know, okay, there's way more to this story. But for my simple mind, I wanted to look at, is that it? No.
She forgot her laptop, so she's using my third iPad from 3 times ago. It's so much more convenient,
and you know what? Mostly because I don't have to wade through all of my research documents that are always open. But look at this. So if we think about the fear about witches from the 16th century, starting in the 15th century, starting with Pluto and Cancer, look at where it starts to really ramp up the fears about technology replacing or taking over humans in the 20th century, right? You've got this where the first time robot comes out is 1921. Then you've got the silent film Metropolis, right? So think about it. It's the first, they're just starting to make movies, and one of the first things they have to make a movie about is kind of this future world where the machines take over.
You know what's weird about Metropolis, though? Because in 1927, that's the boom of stocks and in New York, right? And so New York grows to become this like iconic city in that period. And the idea of labor was so big. It's all the famous pictures of all the men building the skyscrapers throughout those times. But then you have this other part of society who become the majority that's like, we don't have to work as much. We could just put money in these stocks and make a bunch of money. And the idea of the Roaring Twenties kind of is at its peak. So then I think there is that question of like, well, is something going to be coming here to do the labor for us or not, right? So it's weird because the astrology of that time is the Pluto-Uranus square. So it was Pluto that was coming into Cancer, and it was the Uranus in Aries in that Pluto-Uranus square. And so we just had the flip of it in 2012 through 2015, where it was like, we weren't worried about robots. We were more worried, can you get a job and keep it? Is there enough jobs? Is there enough? How's the Fed doing? Is there enough money? Is the monetary policy okay? Is the treasuries okay? Are the bond markets okay? Is the labor market? What's the unemployment rate? Where there was boom or bust, you know?
Yeah. And what, 1927, what was Pluto in?
It was in Cancer. It was 1930s is like the year it's discovered, right? But 1929 is the Pluto-Uranus square. So it's right before it's discovered, the Pluto-Uranus square happens. Which is really wild.
I was just thinking about it because Metropolis is also about, it's an underground city that they're living in. So I don't know if...
And that's because they were building all the subways at that time too. So they're going, maybe they did find things down there.
What is it under there? Yeah, it's so interesting.
The rats.
Yeah, but then you go with the 30s where you get Brave New World. It came up with Flash Gordon, the radio serial. with alien
You know what it's missing in there, which I will give Michael Luton.
Right.
Michael Luton this big credit. He discovered this just 2 years ago. He just passed away about a month ago. Was it 1930 when Pluto was discovered was Superman?
Oh, with kryptonite.
With kryptonite and from another planet,
an alien,
right? And that how you can do all these things and be this investigator, but then also put on the superhero. But the one thing that'll take you down is this kryptonite from a planet that you're from, that you're an alien, right? So it's kind of an interesting Pluto's rise to actually come across the ecliptic, right? That we could actually see it from a telescope for the first time after the last time it had come down 150 years prior. So it's interesting that that moment. And so you can look at that 27 Metropolis, the 32 Huxley, and the 32 Huxley, it's like Pluto is in view. Pluto has been discovered. Like, and remember, they thought Pluto was going to be the biggest planet because the telescopes at the time, to go that far, they were starting to compute in their head, if we can see this and it's that far, it's probably it's the biggest planet.
Now, wait a second. So
and it ended up being one of the smallest.
Okay.
So it was over decades. That's how you know how Pluto's such a weird planet, is how long it takes to discover, but then of course how long it takes to discover its actual size. And then by 2018, we finally get our first pictures of it close up to see the actual.
I was going to ask you,
right?
I mean,
or 2017 into 2018.
What was that probe that went out and saw?
It was Voyager 1, and then it was Voyager 2 was the second one that took the pictures of Pluto.
Wasn't there another one, or am I making that up?
New Horizons.
That's it. Because I was looking at those pictures, just like a week or two ago, and thinking, when they show you the original ones, they still look a little bit
augmented,
pixelated or whatever, and then they create a nicer one. So we still don't really know what it's.
But that's interesting because I would say it's from a Brave New World. That's the real ticker of like, right? Metropolis to me is kind of the hinting something we can't really understand it yet. And it takes a long time for when a planet's discovered to understand it. So that's what's interesting is I would say starting at a Brave New World is more relatable. So Pluto left being able to see not only just on a helio on the ecliptic equator, right? Of understanding that from the solar system point of view, but even from Earth, like you cannot see Pluto with a telescope anymore. You have to use a telescope in space to see Pluto now, or because there's no way to see it. It's below declination now. It's now in the underworld, and that happened in 2018.
I was thinking that the one thing that's not here, I think that should be right there, is War of the Worlds. When was that?
30. I used to think it was 30, but I think it's 38 or 37 or something like that.
Of course, it just brings up the movie from 2005.
If you do the radio,
War of the Worlds
radio broadcast, because it was actually it first came out as a radio broadcast, and it actually people thought it was real.
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about a lot. 1938.
38, yeah. So
people were already afraid.
And that's relatable to this.
Pull that up, but I don't know how to go to that.
That's relatable to this moment with what I brought up in Mars Retrograde.
I don't know how to get to the Safari or whatever.
Oh, you can just push Google like right there, and
then because there's a headline that comes up, a newspaper. Oops. $1938. Of course, it doesn't show it here.
Right, if you go to images, maybe.
Yeah, radio play terrifies nation. For Halloween, it was a Halloween broadcast, right?
Of 38, then you come into 39, and of course World War II starts, but also the same Mars that's going to retrograde, like now opposite Pluto, with the exact flip of what we're happening with right now. Exact flip. But if you got to go on Mars retrograde and watch that. It's 1999 on High Vibe.
Yeah. But what I was thinking while I was watching that show that you just did, or that presentation, I was thinking about the flip, right? And how it is really interesting that at the time in 1938, there is media and there's fear, but there was also the reality of, there was the reality of really bad things happening in the world. Like really bad, like you talked about, that's the first concentration camp. And there was something in Indonesia that year or China. I can't remember what else there was.
That's Japan invading China.
Right. I mean, there are global events happening that, maybe at the time it seemed like the events today, but today, you feel a lot like there are always events around the world, right? But a lot of events are being promoted more in the press or in the media, right? Then at this time,
I think it's different for Americans because we're divided by both coasts to the world, and we don't really connect ourselves with South America at all.
Right.
Right. And Mexico, we kind of, when we want to. If not, we don't. So even with Canada, we kind of don't. So there is this kind of, unless it's happening here,
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you might have talked about it in this show, or it could have been another one, where when you look at Pearl Harbor, right, that's an invasion of airplanes and bombs. Are we having the same astrology with an invasion of drones? I don't know.
Yeah. There's that Mars retrograde. It's watching when the week after Mars comes direct, coming up this March. That replays invasionary aspects and the world changing fully forever, like the X moment.
Yeah. But what's interesting at this time is people were so afraid of this alien invasion that was fake, right?
Well, it was not that it was fake. It was a fictional story, but the way that it was read on the radio, and in 1938, it was close to, I think, 60% of people finally had radios in their home. The antennas had gone around enough to be able to reach all of American homes. So the way that people would sit by the radio to listen to stories, but nobody was doing more science fiction, and nobody was doing, and it was read also using the newscaster to say it as if it was playing out, if it was happening. So for them to hear a traditional, that's how you can tell we're very brainwashed, psyop wise, is like, well, the media is saying it this way, and even if he's playing it fictionally, for the first time being heard, people believed that it was real.
Right. So, well, maybe we should keep that in mind too, that every story you hear is not necessary. Like, they may not be intending to be theatrical about it, right? Orson Welles did this as a theatrical broadcast, and I'm pretty sure it was advertised, maybe, or people were told, and they knew it was a radio show.
I have a good example, which is, until we know what these drones are, we must follow the science and wear masks.
Well,
right, like it's the same thing happening all over again. That's the whole point, right? Like, so it is kind of that we've got to learn our lessons, because even when we covered the plagues, which I'll just show the one thing that we both came up with looking at this, but like looking at this all in context, going back to the plague aspect of it, it's after the Black Death that Europeans, they're on edge still. So if you see California today declared an emergency over the bird flu, which you joked about at our intro. Seeing famine, war, and misfortune, though, as the signs of the divine wrath of the approaching end of the world. So you're seeing that all over again. I can't tell you how many videos over the last 2 years have come out of like, this is the end times. This is like, you're preparing your family. You're going to heaven. Like, this is the end. Like these, right. It's all over the place, right? And then it's interesting because it's the rising of these religious tensions that bring up the spread of the printed stuff that comes out about all the fears of witchcraft, and whether that's through Antichrist stuff or it's just through all these biblical prophecies. And that's what's interesting. It's all about prophecies. But everybody's waiting for this prophecy, and then they're looking for, is it coming true? Right? And then it's like, by the time the Reformation comes, where we were just talking about too, that's where that Antichrist and Doomsday stuff becomes so intense. And that's where it's not just persecution of witches, but people, astrologers, right? Like, oh, you're doing mathematics, like John Dee. Mary throws him into jail, right? And then he survives that. But it's like anything that's against that religious norm, which I would say today, in a free world like America, anything that is against the norm we've seen, or in Canada, for example, the truckers convoy, right, against the norm of those kind of things, or now in media, right, there's been that against the norm. If you're going against the norm, you're dangerous, you're a threat to society. And now we're seeing that in the UK, like you can make a post that somebody feels uncomfortable about and they'll come to your house and arrest you. I just saw another one of those this weekend. I'm like, geez.
Right.
So it's all happening. Especially, there is something about that Pluto Capricorn into Aquarius where it becomes very extremely monumental, the shift. Like a very hard shift that we don't, like we turn a corner really strong. So it's interesting because I feel like we're kind of in the middle of that still. Even though Pluto has arrived into Aquarius, it's like, what's this reformation? Well, I think part of it has been looking at it globally, this very turn in governments away from too far, because I don't even want to put a religious like left or right, just like anything that has felt tyrannical or felt infringement on people and their rights, all the governments that were the incumbents are losing. And then right as Pluto and Aquarius came in, France, their government just fell apart and they're having to put that one together. Germany, that's happening right now again. Now the question's in the United Kingdom again. So that's what's in, and then Justin Trudeau, is he about to resign? So it's interesting to see there is this big, okay, we all know the direction we want to turn. The questions are going to be like, what are the good things of that and what are the bad things of that? Because there is going to be some bad. Right? There is going to be a demonization of like, well, if you remind us of something from that turn, even though you're not doing anything wrong.
Well, the thing is, I think, and especially if you think about the idea of creating a post and being able to be arrested for it in some places, it's because there have been these fears of what it means to say whatever that is. And it's not necessarily religious, right? We don't have the state working in line with the church right now in terms of policing morality. But there is this idea of, you know, if you say something that makes it seem like certain fears are coming true, then you are a danger, right? And it really is touching on an existing fear. Yeah. So if you go to the Salem witch trials, I don't know if it has that in your document.
Yeah, it does. Because that's where it gets to where it's like right here and during the Enlightenment period in the colonial America, which that is where the witch trials and the witch hunts, it all does. Because I think there's a lot of the Enlightenment period where science is a big part of it. A lot of the religious, sects, right? Start like the Pilgrims. We're not going to deal with this. We're going to go to a new world. And then there's this idea of the new world, right? That kind of broadens people's horizon of life, understanding. Well, look at those guys. They decided to leave and start their own Mayflower Compact, and they've created their own government and how they rule themselves.
Right.
They have no rulers except themselves.
And I always like to point out too that it even was happening within the church, so that you had people within the Roman Catholic Church who decided, I'm out of Europe where there's all this fighting. I can go to the New World and set up a mission and have my perfect Catholic world, right?
Right.
And they were there for hundreds of years. That's what I realized when I was in Florida around Tallahassee. There's a mission that was built in the 16th century, very early. And that was there for over, for 200 years. Yeah. I mean, so we are heading into a period of time where these new ways of living that might be a reaction to fears, or it might be us looking at the reality of now and wanting to get away from it. then they will be long lasting. But I think, like right now, we just see if it's in a Pluto Capricorn and institutions don't seem like they're working like we want them to. There's just a lot of freaking out about, what are we going to do now? And what does everything mean in this world?
Yeah, and I think there's the broadening of the horizon that we haven't seen yet, because like there was the idea of the New World. I mean, you have Christopher Columbus, of course, right, 1492, but it takes a long time until Jamestown and really the Pilgrims, right? Like, but then that kind of sets this tone and Enlightenment and the science revolution, and then it gets to where there's not many people looking for witches until you get to the New World, and it's about religion, and then it kind of pops up through the Salem witch trials and becomes this kind of like peak event of like, it could come up really quick. But that's also very Neptune Pisces. Like, gosh, how fast was it demonized if you didn't wear a mask? Now, if you don't, nobody's yelling at you anymore.
Right.
I mean, like, you know, like, and even during the plague doctor time with Dr. Schnabel, it was like kids start singing crazy story or songs that are still Ring Around the Rosie today over him wearing his crazy mask and his stuff. And they thought that was the way to defeat it. Yet actually it's what spread the plague. So I think that's where it gets a little bit, it's weird. We're living through all these periods at the same time, astrologically.
That was one thing I was going to say about why I started to say something about Salem was, it starts because the minister, I mean, there's so many theories about why it happened, but there was a new minister in town, and he had young children, and his needs weren't being met by the congregation. But at the same time, his kids
Not enough choir boys? Sorry.
Not enough firewood was one of the things.
Okay.
The town owed him firewood.
That's what they called it then?
I don't know if they don't have choir
Not
boys.
enough firewood, not enough tinder up in here.
No, not in a Puritan church.
Oh, jeez.
So his children were hanging out with Tituba, who was like people.
King Tinder.
People debate whether she was Native American or she was enslaved. And she was, had some sort of practices that were too seeming like voodoo, and the kids started to freak out about it and pretend like they were being, or actually, I don't know why I assume they were pretending, but they are being possessed, and then that's how everything gets touched off. But in that context, what you have to understand is that this minister had been giving sermons for months before that time that were telling people about the dangers of Satan coming amongst the people. And he was reviving these old ideas that on your document, it was talking about how the Enlightenment had started in other parts of the world, right? And in America. But here you have this village where the fearful ideas come up, and people, and it spreads like wildfire, and then all the accusations happen. So that even after the event, one of the books that was written about it by John Hale, and if I had my computer, I would show parts of it. But in 1697, he was a Puritan who was writing about what had happened. So already by 1697, people realized, wow, that was weird, how in all the years leading up to Salem, we had 2 accusations or something like that, and 2 people executed for witchcraft. Then Salem happens, and we have 200 people being put on trial and so many people being executed for being witches. And so his purpose in writing that book was to warn people about how quickly fears can spread. And I don't remember how I was making that connection originally to what we were talking about, but obviously it's really similar. And if you look at something like today and how we're using everything we've been thinking about for the 20th century on to now, to the 21st century, and all of the latest things that we think about what might be happening in the world, then that's how we're understanding unknown phenomenon or things that are happening. Whether it's, remember the mall thing in Florida where it was like something happened in a mall and Do you remember that you remember that whole thing, right? Where it was like maybe an alien was in a mall and people were fleeing, or did I just dream that? And people were saying it was a made up thing, right? It could have
the Florida thing in January, the beginning of this year, in Miami.
But I mean, so that right away, again, it shows all the stories that are out there. Some people maybe were fearing it, but a lot of people were thinking, no, that's just projectors. There are so many other explanations people have. So I think we're seeing right now a similar clash of ideologies. Whereas in Salem in the 1690s, something like that could happen and spread, where other people in Europe were looking at it and thinking, what in the world are those people doing? Because they had a completely different belief system. So I think we're really seeing a time in which there's so many different belief systems that are on the loose and having an effect, and they will be having effects in ways that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because in the middle of this, I just got this tweet, and it was Justin Bieber just has come out, and he's on a big stage at the Church Talkative, coming out as a preacher and wanting to move his life to being a religious speaker. Mm-hmm. And that's something that in 17 Mag I said in 2019, that's what his Saturn return will be. He's going to become a spiritual.
Justin Bieber,
right? So somebody just sent me all that, you called it, right? But it reminds me of what we've been talking about, because it's like there is something that comes up through these transits where people the fear outdoes the confidence within themselves to find security in this moment, and reaches for kind of what I feel is the last straw of I have to prove my spiritual worth because something bad is going to happen. That the dark forces are going to win. And I think that a lot of the stuff also is kind of written in some of those kind of times that people, that's what's really weird about a lot of these writings, and especially these prophecies that are done in the Bible. A lot of them are through dreams, right? They're through this, whether they're channeling or not, this connection to Christ that's telling them this is what's going to happen, or at least recording it that way, or even in Acts, where Paul is writing about his big change over, right? But to me, the Acts are a little bit more relatable of a human going through hey, these guys aren't really the people I thought they were. And I really don't want to be going after the people that are advocating for the healer Jesus, right? It's kind of a big, more realistic shift, but I think a lot more of these prophetic, especially revelations or any of these other, talking to Christ, talking to angels kind of energies of the old times have this really kind of well, if you don't listen to what this is, then everything else will take you to hell, or it will be this horrible thing. And you see people really in these times, a lot of people kind of culminating around these ideas and belief systems. Mm-hmm. And they're all about too much of the fear that's being seen, and too much of the apocalyptic fears, right? Because it's really, that's the root, is it's driven by, I don't want to be on the wrong side when I die. So that's kind of the deeper root of it.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely say it's driven by not wanting to be on the wrong side, and that's the case for so many people. But also Justin Bieber and other people could be having a real conversion experience, or finally coming to terms with the spiritual side of things. But as you were talking, I was thinking about this, that last week I went to a service that was the Our Lady of Guadalupe, because her day is December 12th. And you used to have a poster of her in your old office, and I just looked, but I don't think I see it here.
That was a Neptune and Pisces transit.
Was it? Because I think, was it 1530?
Yeah, it was in the 15. Yeah.
So what's interesting?
It was the Neptune transit in Pisces prior to the Salem, so 1692, 165 years back.
Wow. But in that case, what's interesting in that particular story is that it's about the people using the spirituality and interpreting revelation also, because there's a lot of imagery in the way she's represented where it connects to the I guess, Aztec spirituality as well, right? So it's empowering in a way. It connected with existing beliefs, but they connected it with revelation. So if you look at it in that way, where it connects with this story.
1531, it was also Pluto coming into Aquarius, yeah.
So if you connect it with this story that's all about sort of things being decimated and this new world emerging, or people who are not righteous being destroyed, and this seven-headed dragon rising up, or whatever is all the imagery there. In this case, the peasant who was asked to build the church on the area where the Virgin appeared, he says, I can't do that. These people won't listen to me. And she said, no, it is because you're the person who the people won't listen to that you need to do this.
Right.
So the story becomes about empowering the people who are out of power. So it can be used also to uproot the traditional power structures.
It's really weird to me about this Lady of Guadalupe, because they are using that Aztec, because that's at the same, this, right, like Spain comes in and takes over that whole entire country and kills all the Aztecs. But the Aztec culture, there's a very dark side to it, which that kind of like is the deeper meaning of the excuse to eradicate the Aztecs was that they were cannibals eating people, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what's really interesting to me, is that then it's like using some of that and the idea of embodying the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. But the Lady of Guadalupe story too is another visual, that she appeared on the top of a hill. So it's another hill story, kind of like a witch.
But a good witch who brought red roses or roses.
Correct. So that's why, especially in Mexico now today, people will see their rice and their beans and they'll move it. And, oh, Mary, she's here, the Queen, Lady of Guadalupe. And that also goes into Santeria. That's in a lot of the homes down in Mexico where Lady Guadalupe is. So if you walk into a home and you don't kneel or you don't give praise to as Santeria, especially with any of the cartels, they'll shoot you on sight in the house.
Well, so that is, again, a group of people who are not really the official structure, the official power structure, who are using the image. But I mean, that's not a great example because that's not positive, right? But the thing is that she's become who you pray to for sort of like your last chance. You're the person who's run out of luck.
Here's the actual
the patron of that.
See how she pops up?
Oh wow, that's such a great picture for this. And the thing is that
it's kind of weird how she is propped up by the angels, like in kind of like in an egg format almost in many ways, like a womb.
I think it's
well, it's really weird because she's the womb that held Jesus, yet it's almost like they're holding her now in a womb.
Yeah, it is.
It
was the cloak that the boy brought the roses back from the hill, and then when it was opened, it had the image on it, right?
Yes.
But what's interesting about it, when you brought up the thing about the Aztec culture having been cannibalistic or having that element, right? And I know that Michael Luton also wrote about that. I remember we talked about it. I think he wrote something about it. Did you just now say that? But what's interesting is that by bringing this story forward, you could say the church was trying to bring in the Aztec people under Christianity.
Correct.
And then, but what's funny is the central thing of Christianity would be the communion and wanting to focus people on the communion. But instead, they also created this figure that can exist within Catholicism, but also without. So if you look at that picture you showed, you can see the stars on the cloak and you can see the indigenous culture. There are images that connect to the indigenous culture. So I think she's an interesting example of how spirituality kind of connects to all these different movements during these sorts of transits.
Well, it's interesting. Like this picture shows the new Basilica Church and the old next to it. this is the same site, all about the Virgin of Guadalupe, the Lady of Guadalupe, however you want to look at it. This one's interesting. It's a 18th century painting of God the Father fashioning the image. So then there's also the depictions of Christ and Lord like approving of the visualization of Mary embodied in a Spanish area and tone and vibe.
But look at how he's inspired by the Holy Spirit. He's not even really looking, he's channeling it.
I mean, it reminds me because it was the century prior of Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like Joan of Arc worked really well. Let's do this now.
Well, she helped in the 100 Years' War.
Right.
So.
But I think they were thinking of it being maybe 1,000-year war with the Aztecs that wouldn't maybe just go away unless they can convert the people of the land. Because really, we have to remember that area weren't Spanish people, they were Aztecs. Mm-hmm. And I think people forget that history, that Mexico and the idea of being Catholic is a new thing. I mean, they're just found even more Aztec and Mayan sites under dirt with using LiDAR 3D laser technology in the last year, and more of them that they've never found, right? So it was surrounded, and how do you convert people? And that's what's really weird about that.
That's interesting that you said they found more under the surface, right? That relates to those cultures. And I was thinking about one of the high vibers had posted a story about the earliest Christian cross that's been discovered. I don't know if you saw that on the community forum.
Oh, you mean the one that Constantine's mom created?
No, not that. Was that by her? Because I didn't.
Because they all are. Remember that it was in 325 AD during the Council of Nicaea that then he taps his mother and says, I know that you've never gotten the attention you want, so why don't you take the 3 crosses that you found in Jerusalem, you don't know which one's which or even if they are, and have people in the streets who are sick touch it. And whichever one heals the sick person is the true cross. So they sat out there for weeks and had sick people come, dying, touch it, and would watch them die and be like, nope, not the one, and waited until the one woman who came, who was kind of sick, touched it, and then felt better. They said that's the true cross. So everybody believes the true cross is based off Constantine's mom.
But the Pope just came out with that document about we need to believe the miracles still. Do you remember
exactly.
Was that last year?
Yeah, but if you see the story, remember I did a whole visualization of it, like all these sick people, and she's like, "Well, I gotta sell my Etsy product. Which one is my son gonna pick?"
You're such a doubting David.
But no, that's just like fact, though. That's what's really crazy is when you go into the story. I mean, out of everyone to tap for understanding as you're going through Jerusalem, right? Like, and you're trying to find the artifacts and. Well, there's these 3 different crosses, and there's also just these beams. Let's put them together, make them cross, and see if somebody touches them and it heals them. And if it does, then that's the true cross of Jesus. So really, there is no evidence that that's the actual cross. Anybody saying that there is...
They were using the science of their day.
Right, but there's still... So anybody saying that they found that today, the science is going to be similar. There is no way.
Well, this cross, I think, wasn't the true cross. It was... the earliest pendant that was ever found that had a Christian inscription on it, I believe. But what I was going to say is how interesting it is that as science progresses, and this happened in the Enlightenment too, because we talked about Isaac Newton, science is progressing, but what is it that we apply it to? All this religious stuff. Like we're always trying to prove the existence of something greater than us or some sort of mystical thing. Because in Isaac Newton's day, he was trying to prove his own version of revelation and talking about when the end of times would be, and he figured that out with calculus and all of that. But today, they do things like study the Shroud of Turin, the Shroud of Jesus, to see was that actually real. Or they can go look for artifacts. They apply the technology as much as we want to think, oh, this is like this future world that's going to be different and these robots are out of control and there's no humanity and whatever, people are still using it. And as probably as great of numbers, they're using technology to apply it to existing belief systems and spirituality.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, like, this is a picture of when, it's not like the church accepts the Lady of Guadalupe right away.
Right.
But this is where it's finally accepted. The Pope accepts it in the 1750s. This is 1737, right? Okay. And it's now
a confirmed miracle.
Right? Instead of it being Jesus sitting behind the Pope, right? It's now the Lady of Guadalupe, which is like, oh, it's we've converted the whole entire Aztec country that we have invaded fully. Thanks. And what's really weird to me is that it's England, right, that schisms and leaves. So it's Spain that's like, we'll do your bidding, Pope. We'll go over there and do all that. We had Christopher Columbus go there. He found some gold. I know he was looking for gold, but he found there was a lot of weird people. I'm sure we can find some more stuff if we keep going over there. Because that's what's weird is it's Portugal and Spain. It's that whole entire like discovery to find gold. That, oh, look at the Aztecs. Look at all the stuff we can take here.
But then suddenly, oh, wait, these people don't have Jesus. Let's get some missions over
Correct.
there. But we'll bring the soldiers too, just in case.
Yeah, and because these people are bad, they're eating each other. We just do it differently. Like we drink wine and say it's blood, and we do wafers and say it's body. So we're better. But what's interesting to me is this reminds me of the drones.
Okay, how?
Right? That all it takes, same thing, Pluto at the same ingress, right? And Lady of Guadalupe shows up, so everybody's like, these are the aliens. And now it's just going to be like the images or something that comes up that everybody's like, it's New Jersey that is the breeding ground of the space aliens. And now it'll be like, years from now, those pictures will be like, that was it. It was that they popped up. They showed us the miracle, right? Or whatever it might be.
There will be a miracle.
Right, like like looking at it, it blows my mind because it's all like this is one huge area of the world, and it's kind of contained to just that. Like it's all about Lady of Guadalupe, and by doing that, it converts the whole country of people, and all of their ancestors for the last 500 years feel really weird if they don't do it.
Interesting.
And that they use
it was
this one image,
where
1531,
she appears, and that was Pluto. Where?
Pluto coming into Aquarius, Neptune,
and
Pisces.
Then 1750. She's 1757. Was it?
They showed like the Pope. There's a Pope in front of a picture of her to kind of like, hey, look at this. We're doing it.
And that astrology.
Right. Yeah. And here's actually the allegory of the Papal Declaration in 1754 by Pope Benedict the 14th of Our Lady of Guadalupe patronage over Spain in the presence of the viceroyal authorities. So here's the official. So it's the 1750s that it takes over 200 years to finally get it approved because it's like, well, that's a lot of customers. And do you see how they throw all the white men around it? I'm not getting all woke on anybody. I'm just saying, like, the idea of how are you going to convert the Aztec culture to become that, right? You want to see your version of...
If you want to see your version, look in the corner. The really little tiny picture. It shows the story of the guy...
seeing her pop up, and then there
he is, going to get the people, and then there they are.
Yeah,
and that's the beginning of the story. So, if that's the case, then right now there is, like you said this with the Mars retrograde. I think that there's the beginning that the droids. I keep wanting to say droids. The drones will. There will be something else that comes up that then becomes one of these moments that signify something new.
A new caste system, like how this was depicted, the most biggest part of the understanding of the caste system in Spain and in the New World, of how it was the most frequently reproduced painting of the Virgin Mary, a Virgin of Guadalupe, 1750. And it's the image of the Virgin and the depiction of the caste system. But I'm just laughing because those old images from, you know, what were those images of the caste system you showed me that were in England in English times, where it's like people that are farmers are on the ground and like you get up and
that was the great chain of being.
Yeah.
That was a concept that already existed within the church.
Right.
Right. That God, the proper hierarchy for the world is God at the top, and then there was this great chain that went all the way down, and everybody had their place on the chain. And
so now the drones are going to find their place in the chain.
Are they? Or is it are they really showing us something experimental like your Benjamin Franklin picture?
Or it's like AI too. But it is interesting that that's how you embed it in.
Well, it is. Yeah.
Right. So like the highest of the aristocrats, they try to show them lower, but she's with the common people of Spain, the new world, where the boats are and everything. She's up to that level with everyone else. Everyone else is not as high as her. And these people who have money and who are great are actually a little bit lower.
Well, it's showing you
with the cornucopia
that they're all these different mixed types of people. And then who's on top of those? Look at the top people are the white Europeans. So of course, officially sanctioned by the Our Lady of Guadalupe is the whole caste system. But of course, that's being created by Europeans who are trying to use it in that way, and it doesn't mean people really understood it in that way or consumed it in that way. I don't know.
Well, here is her in Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
In the closet.
It's interesting. There's.
All right, I'm sorry.
They just tuck her away.
The gargoyles are in the next room over.
Well, where's Esmeralda?
Right? But they have a chapel there in the cathedral. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to me because it's like there's a head and then there's something. They kind of put it in the corner like, yeah.
Maybe they put it in a special place.
Or here's in the Lady of Angels, the City of Angels, right? Containing a fragment from Juan Diego, right? So like this is more of that fragment, I think, is what's being worn there.
Uh-huh. So a relic from him.
Mm-hmm. Then that's Santuano de Guadalupe is the oldest church in the USA dedicated to the Virgin of Guadalupe. And then the revolutionary banner carried by Miguel Hidalgo and his insurgent army during the Mexican War of Independence. So then it was a coat of arms in the Mexican-American War, which they lost really bad.
Well, it's
so she didn't carry the. Maybe Alamo, they got some good shots in, but
even Joan of Arc eventually got.
Right, so it has to always be like, what? And it also helps with the losses, right? Like, oh, well, we died in honor of her.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that's the way that it's like what we were talking about last time when Queen Mary came onto the throne and burned all the Protestants. They were immortalized in the Book of Martyrs. So, yeah, they lost their lives, but they become the martyrs that, rally the next group of people.
I know, it's just a recreation of the face of Our Lady of Guadalupe by an anthropologist in 2021. Mm-hmm. The same people who brought out the aliens of paper mache, I'm sure.
It was what?
No, I'm just saying, like, the whole paper mache aliens that came from the same area is where the Lady of Guadalupe is. Like in parts of Mexico, they were showing all that they had brought them to that they found in Peru, right?
Yeah.
It's like there is something about that area too that spurs up. Well,
I mean, it happens It happens everywhere. I mean, this is so funny. There are so many religious themes in culture right now, because I brought this up before watching the film The Heretic, right? With Hugh
I know,
Grant,
I do want to watch that movie.
that it's these Mormon girls who come to his house to try to convert him. They were invited, like they come in and
Yeah, I saw the trailer of it, and then he tests their faith through this weird house that has all these faith tests that are.
And he's questioning them about their beliefs and trying to convince them of why the faith is wrong. But it's another example of how in the Americas you can have this completely different religious movement spring up, especially because it's an undiscovered territory. I don't remember exactly. Were they in? No, it was New York or something. Where was it? John Smith. I don't remember the name of Brigham Young or whoever.
Brigham Young. I mean,
who was the first?
John
Is
Snow is the prophet who was killed. Yeah.
The
beginning of the pilgrimage of the Mormons. Yes.
When was that Pluto and Aquarius when that happened, or was it Pisces?
No, that's all in the 1800s.
But Pluto was in Aquarius until the 1800s, right? Or am I?
No, it left in 1776, 1791 or 2, somewhere in there, or 76. No, 96, 1795, 1796. Mm-hmm. Maybe 1797.
But I mean, that was another faith belief system that emerged in the Americas and rallied a lot of people around new ideas and got people organizing communities around these new, really radical ideas about faith, right? And so it's kind of a similar thing where you see the emergence of completely different belief systems that then turn into, it's like now it's completely different. Like you can go to Salt Lake City and you see the temple, and it's its own institution that is so different from everything else.
Right. But so in the Mormon faith, it's Lorenzo Snow, right? And he served as the 5th president. Snow was the 5th child of the master, Eliza Snow. The Snow family valued in learning and saw each child as educational opportunities. Hold on, let me do the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is kind of interesting because they are using it more like the Jesus figure than the Mary figure, right? Because they're the opposite. It's like, no, it's the prophecies of a prophet who's saying he's a prophet and getting visions from Christ to go, and also it's about changing, that there's more continuation from the original biblical stories from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that the Old Testament and idea of the next temple is going to be moved to America and it's going to be moved out of Jerusalem, right? So it's the idea, the Mormons go way deeper than that, but that is kind of the deeper part, and that in their doctrine that you're allowed to have prophetic work, and they also don't believe in the Trinity.
So it's built on this prophecy of him seeing angels.
Yeah, it's Joseph Smith. Sorry, Joseph Smith, and it's about the Second Great Awakening.
Yeah, I always think we should do a show on the Second Great Awakening.
Right. That here's like a Methodist camp meeting in 1819. Right. Like there's this Second Great Awakening that happens. Right. The Quaker movement kind of falls short in these times, and then these other groups really kind of take over their own way and go, and that's why a lot of the Quaker history is stored at BYU, because a lot of Quakers ended up into the LDS movement or different Methodist churches and so forth, or Baptist churches, but yeah, and you know, it was about a big migration. And what's really weird about the story is that these temples were supposedly, some of them were just there, right? And then they had to build some. So it's really weird. There's all, but Brigham Young is one of those followers, right? So we have to remember that it was all the Joseph Snow who's the one. But once they get all there, he's like killed, right? He's also the one who published the Book of Mormon, which is part of the Mormon faith, right? It's not just the Bible, but the Book of Mormon itself has like the deciphering of the Bible itself, how it's got to be shifted. Mm-hmm. And he attracted tens of thousands of followers by the time of his death 14 years later. He wrote it at 24.
Does that connect in any way with some of the other you've been looking at? Like
a lot of the stuff with him is the beginning of Neptune ingressing into Pisces and this whole like movement. Right?
Interesting.
But it does get to a really weird place when they all arrive and they're having to build temples. And then there's also the practice of polygamy that becomes a big question, and that becomes fundamental LDS, right? FLDS, which there's actually a really good documentary about that on Netflix right now. That's crazy how not a lot of, the Mormon church separated itself from polygamy, but there were fundamental ones for a long time. And the last big head of that movement had 30 wives by the end and had 64 kids. And so to find the new leader, he also told them he would be the last prophet. And so what's crazy is in 1998, when the Olympics came to Salt Lake City, he told all of them, this is the moment. We're all going to be taken, so we need to move, and we're going to all move to this one area. And then he died, and every single person, that 14,000 people were like, well, he said he was the last prophet, that we would all go. So they didn't know what to do. It reminds me so much of Lady of Guadalupe.
Why?
This whole movement over like, oh yeah, I guess, yeah, somebody saw this site, so let's all follow this person's idea of it.
Well, I mean, that's really, if you go back to Battle of the Gods, and you're talking about Paul going around and doing his acts for the different congregations, like writing his letters. I'm like, it's all coming back to me. Paul wrote all these letters to the new churches that were in all of the different areas around the Greek world. And there would have been moments that he was talking about where it would have been like, well, there was this miraculous moment that happened, right? I mean, when you think about how Christianity first took off, it had to be around particular things that happened that someone said was miraculous. And for some reason that took hold and spread. Like in the ideas of Christianity, people have looked at all the different mythologies, and that's actually part of the Heretic movie, right? He talks about all the other stories that are similar, right? That existed at different times. So at every time, there's a particular mythology that takes root, and it becomes a religion.
Yeah, like it was Smith who wrote, he had received a vision that resolved his religious confusion. And this is the same thing the Quakers wrote about. But he said that in 1820, while he had been praying in a wooded area near his home, God the Father and Jesus Christ together appeared to him, told him his sins were forgiven, and said that all contemporary churches had turned aside from the gospel. Smith said he had recounted the experience to the Methodist minister, who dismissed the story with great contempt. And according to an historian, Stephen C. Harper, there is no evidence in the historical record that Joseph Smith told anyone but the minister of his vision for at least a decade, and Smith might have kept it private because of how uncomfortable that first dismissal was. And then the vision grew to importance to Smith's followers, who eventually regarded it as the first event in the restoration of Christ's church to earth. So it kind of gets into also planetary aspects too in Mormonism. And then so then he receives these golden plates. So they show that, right? Again, it's like the Lady of Guadalupe, but it's Jesus.
An apparition in the
Right,
woods there.
and this,
or at a hill, a hidden hill it's set up there.
but it doesn't have the backing of any other main church because they already had separated, right? Like any of these churches separated from the Catholic Church prior to almost 300 years prior. So to have the Catholic Church back a vision like Joan of Arc, but that's before the schism, but after the schism, well, you're going to convert millions of people because the church says that that is so. So it's interesting to see where people kind of go off on their own and find these movements. And
yeah, I mean, that's the only way to do it in a Protestant setting is you have to have your own prophetic vision and then people start following you.
yeah, and I think that's where, because there is interesting stuff about, like, everybody's changing the doctrine that's from the Council of Nicaea in Christian religion, right? But even if you go into, Islam, right? Like, there are two different sects of that, the Shia and the Shiite. And there's the connected to the bloodline of Muhammad the Prophet or not. Like that's what's really interesting is the Shia movement, right? And then the Shiite movement, the more rare,
Sunni.
or the Sunni and the Shiite, sorry, the Sunni movement and the Shiite movement, right? And then there's a very small percentage in that movement that's connected with Iran and with the Ayatollah that they're saying he's still connected to the Muhammad bloodline. So that'd be like today, instead of the Pope being picked because a bunch of the cardinals come together and get a message from God to vote for that Pope until the white smoke comes out, it's more like you have bloodline still of Muhammad.
Isn't it interesting that it didn't in Christianity?
Stay that way.
Well, but it didn't go with the bloodline. Because why can't Jesus have a wife and a child?
Because it's if you think of in Islamic religion, that's why they force women to not have their rights, that they have to be basically subservient to the man.
Because of bloodline?
Bloodline, right? Like if you think about it, it's about bloodline deeply because it's about maintaining control over it all and doing whatever you need to do. And that's what's really weird about that religion. That women, there are no women prophets like under Muhammad. It's how his wife, and it's like how she is to him, that everybody must be that way.
But
really
she was
weird.
A pretty independent woman, so.
I know that's what's odd, but it's it's.
I mean, but isn't it interesting how it's okay? Bloodlines in one version of Islam, but isn't it? It's really interesting how bloodline becomes so important to secular dynasties, but not religious.
Well, in Judaism, it's very similar. Like you marry somebody who's a Jew, right? So they have to convert. But
your mother has to be Jewish, right, for you to become Jewish or to be Jewish, or you convert. I think, isn't it made true?
I think it's become more loose now, where it's much more progressive. But there's a progressive wing of it, and there's a conservative wing, right? So.
But if it can go by your bloodline, it's more of a threat, like I think, to society. To
it's the idea,
rulers,
though, is having
like,
kids that are Jewish from Jewish parents. So if you're Jewish, and that's why people who are Jewish and they want to go marry, you just don't go out and date people who aren't Jewish, because then conversion is a huge undertaking, right? Very difficult for somebody to want to convert to a religion that way and learn the language and learn all the traditions. And it's very different than traditional Christianity or even Islam, right? It's closer to Islam, but.
Well, it gets into.
But the second coming has not happened in Judaism. It's more like the question.
Hasn't happened.
The Messiah has not shown up.
waiting.
It's more, but it's the Messiahs plural. That it's like the Elohim, whether it's the aliens coming back, really old tradition, or in more progressive. We don't know. It's a lot more open-ended religion.
Do you think that makes sense to not tie it to bloodline, because you could spread your religion more, but also
there's no bloodline unless it's through Moses.
Yeah.
And there's no bloodline to Moses, basically. So,
But your idea of your country also, if it's connected to blood, you're limited, right? That's why in the United States, we can have people who come and would be naturalized because the citizenship is not based on just birth. But that is one way you can be part of it. But what I was wondering is, do you think astrologically, are there times when bloodlines are more important than others?
I think whenever you see these big Leo transits that are rare happen, so because Leo connects to ancestry, right? So, and blood. So it's like, even with Pluto and Aquarius being the opposition, right? It's the issues with bloodlines. Like you see big families that have been around forever, Rothschilds, or look what's happening with Charles, right? I mean, he's got William, but we've seen that with Henry, like, oh yeah, the 8th, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm going to have this all in order, and then it doesn't go in order, and then it causes confusion, and then it goes back to a woman right? So there's going to be some sort of confusion after Charles is gone, right? And so there's always a connection to either but you have to look ahead sometimes. So it's kind of like, yeah, Chiron's going to meet with Uranus and Leo when Pluto's leaving Aquarius. And that's the moment that Chiron goes farther than Uranus in the transit around the sun. So Chiron actually is farther out than Uranus. So that's where humanity has kind of its freedom moment, but also understands its bloodline. So I think the deeper question now is, what's the bloodlines of humans to another species, opposed to Darwinian, mammal, animal, and even oceanic and amphibious all the way up, that there's another bloodline that's crossbred with it.
Interesting.
Right. So, but that's what's like, these fears and these doomsdays are all like, I think the reason why there's been history that always says them, repeats them, and then it doesn't happen, it's more of the fall of the systems, but everybody comes back with a new system and the same style of doomsday scenario. But what's interesting is that we're still here. I mean, if we were to be the dinosaurs, and imagine, all the Tyrannosaurus Rexes and all the raptors are hanging out, and they believe in, you got to eat other dinosaurs. And then you have the brontosauruses, who are the vegan ones, who believe in a religion of peace and tranquility in the tropics. And they have all their debates, and they think every time that, I don't know, the god that's going to come down, that's a bird, not a pterodactyl. When it finally shows up, then, that's the Antichrist, and that's when the whole world's going to go down. And how many millions or Cretaceous periods did that go until finally it was just an asteroid that came and hit the Earth and they all left? And do you think all the brontosauruses were like, this is the moment we were telling you about because you guys were eating meat? And all the raptors are running around like, I don't think so.
But so what's
we're
so
jumping
funny,
on our spaceship to be reptilians.
What's funny is the AI pictures of the drones. One of them looks like a pterodactyl kind of guy coming down to Earth.
Yes.
Some of those pictures were so scary and funny at the same time.
It's funny because we're going to all witness this together. I took one that we made and I made it a video, and we'll see how it came out. Okay, here we go. So we made this picture, and then it's 20 seconds long, but it's kind of taking forever it's just kind of like
just doing a slideshow.
More of a slideshow version of it. Kind of weird that it did put it around a lot of like
Vatican-looking buildings, or St. Paul's Cathedral. I don't know what that is. I think it's the Capitol building.
Oh, here's this one, yeah.
Yeah, see those. They're so weird looking.
You're the one who came up with the idea of witch
but-
drones.
But I mean, that's what I said. I love to bring these ideas to you because you create something that is just perfect.
I know. Well, you were like, yeah, and I'm trying to do it on the eastern seaboard in the north. And I went, oh, well, let's add Benjamin Franklin instead of the kite with a key, but he's the one directing all the witch drones.
It's just so.
Right. And then there was this one, which kind of.
Yeah, that is
Oh,
the one that's
creepy.
spooky.
Isn't that Merlin showing up?
Merlin's hat's taken off.
That's what's really weird too, is with witches, they kind of morph into this more wearing like an alchemy like style Merlin style hat, whereas like witches of King James II before he was king and Prince in Scotland, it wasn't about witches' hats. He believed those witches were stopping him to see his new wife and creating the storms and oceans. So, and it wasn't about their hats. The hat thing, it kind of reminds me of Wizard of Oz, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another thing we haven't even mentioned is that Wicked is this big thing right now.
Oh, I can't believe it.
So, what is that?
This was that first one that I just put in a prompt and it was kind of cheap and I was like, hold on, I'll make it a better prompt. But it was like kind of weird because it is kind of like there is some attached to the drones. And I think that the fears that come out, right, is the nefarious part. But what's interesting is like the most nefarious, which I don't think that people have put together yet, is what if the AI that's been everywhere for the last, let's say, year, but let's condense the last 2 weeks. OpenAI's big rollouts of O1, which is cognitive thinking AI, mixed with Sora that just launched, or even looking at Grok and the largest data centers of AI being turned on, and then quantum computing. Computers are now more than Google, more than IBM. They're being built in much bigger quantities. But the compression of all of it, and also with Apple Intelligence being in Apple phones, running AI without having to be on network, but on your phone, are the drones, AI drones that now have AGI turned on, which means the government can't say they are theirs anymore because they're not in control of them. That they're their own entity now, doing their own thing.
Well, there were a lot of fears of that in
Terminator.
in all of the things
Terminator.
leading up to this, right?
Yeah.
There were a lot of people imagining that could be a possibility, but
But it is weird that we just had this worldwide, I don't even want to use the word pandemic, but it's like, okay, go with how the history is written, a pandemic, right? Other people are going to see it different. Kind of like the flu of 1918. I mean, it's kind of like, well, people still went and fought war and they weren't wearing masks. Or World War I. Right.
they were wearing gas masks.
They were wearing gas masks, though. But they were in the most filthiest conditions of all time, and they were fine. Mm-hmm. Right? So it reminds me of, like, there is something about that does bring on all these fears, especially when there's, like, a worldwide situation. And, it was, like, historically, because it was so far-reaching and it was so in our faces, there was no worldwide pandemic since the Black Death that was so reaching of the world, meaning like, it came from Mongolia, and then as people traveled from what's known as Crimea today into different parts of Europe, and it's spreading throughout that 4-year cycle, it was like, well, it touched everyone, it touched the whole population, and half the people were lucky by God, or that's what's really weird, is if you survived the plague, it was almost like, well, I guess God is on your side. But if you didn't, that's what's interesting. My history question to you would be, is there like writing about the Black Death? Did people think that people who got it were not saved by God, but were in a place of sin? because that's how I put my prediction back in 2019 with what was coming. I was like, if you're in your destiny, you'll survive, but if you're not, you won't.
Right.
Is there any
think that,
writings of that, or?
We did look at the Decameron in one of our shows, like one of the second History in the Stars or whatever it was early on when we looked at Dante also.
Oh, yes.
That
I saw that they used that in the Heretic movie. He had a whole Dante's Inferno picture.
Yeah, you need to watch it.
I mean, I saw the trailer, but yeah.
Maybe that's all you need to see. I don't know. And he also uses Monopoly, and you've talked about Monopoly, so there you go. But okay, so back to that. There was this idea that the people who left Florence in the Decameron, which is this first literary thing that's kind of like a novel, right? That there was something decadent and wrong with them because they were going off to kind of live their own life while people were dying of the plague. But because they removed themselves and were able to do that because they were elite or they had the resources, they would have kind of been seen as godless because they're living in a way that wasn't necessarily Christian. They weren't within their community. They had removed themselves, but they survived. So I think what happened is people saw a complete breakdown, and it took a long time for them to process it, and that's why the church ended up really being so vulnerable to attack at that point. So there wasn't a lot of people writing big treatises of who got through and who didn't. But there was a lot of religious questioning and people really trying to apply their religion to their life because it was like, that prostitute down the road survived and my whole family that was godly died, or whatever, right? People it was shattering their personal belief systems. And it's interesting that you talked about it when you were doing Shattered Reality, right? That it was part of that whole confusion of this different world. And I think we're still dealing with the after effects of having gone through that period of time ourselves, or the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Was that what it was? The
conjunctional astrology of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and then the following of all those conjunctional aspects of 1345 that built up into 1347 when the Mongolians are throwing the plague-filled people over the walls. Mm-hmm. But that's interesting because I put into 01, I said, was there some sort of belief about people who died during the Black Plague that they were not godly or in with God? And it said, Black Death beliefs in divine judgment. Many Europeans believe that the plague was God's punishment for human sin. So it's more about the overall, which that's a very Roman magistrate in the Senate, old republic idea. Mm-hmm. So that's what's really interesting.
Everybody will be punished.
Everybody will be punished,
because some people aren't behaving, so you're all going to pay the price.
Right, like there's too many bathhouses going on, and so that's why we're having floods or whatever. That's an old Roman idea from the old republic. So it's interesting that carries over still. The collective sense of divine wrath suggested that society as a whole had fallen short of moral and religious standards, which is kind of interesting because you see that is the connection of 2020 with COVID was then the fallout of the Epstein right away, right? Then now we're in the Diddy situation, and then we're in the corruption of government. So it's like all of that is like being kind of revealed afterwards, which to them is kind of the same thing. It's kind of like, well, this was happening and the event happens of the Black Plague, but do you see what happens? It's because now we're starting to see all this exposure of all this stuff. Like all the corruption and all the dark things, and people were not living in their moral, or they were responded by undertaking acts of penance. But again, penance can sometimes be giving your arms up. I covered that a lot in the old, because that's what's weird is this follows the end of the Holy Wars, right? That then it's like, there's kind of like a guilty consciousness, I think, on Europeans of well, arms didn't work, so let me give up my arms. Maybe that'll be better. Maybe that was the wrong thing to do.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, there were so many responses after it where it did seem like, okay, everybody's being punished no matter what. Then it took centuries and still weird philosophies are emerging, or weird religious ideas about, like, you get predestination that comes up during the Reformation, which is it actually is bringing back that old idea of trying to bring back order and think, well, if my life looks good, it means I'm saved and I'm going to heaven. And if your life's bad, sorry, that means you're not saved.
It's kind of like how they paint those caste systems, which is it's weird. It's a Vedic idea. The caste system actually is from the Vedic world, right? That makes its way over into Europe. Everything goes back and forth between. And that's what's weird, as we found in the history, is when the world becomes too centralized and there's a meeting point where it all cracks and it all breaks apart. And the Black Plague was, ironically, where the world's kind of clashing right now.
And I feel like, we're seeing now too, that there are some people who don't see it at all, like you just described it, right? That there are people who, I don't remember specifically what you just said.
that like when the world universalizes and comes together and trades together and starts to get involved in each other's business, and that the cross section of the Black Plague was where Crimea is today, when the Mongolians start some skirmishes and there's this huge clash and this whole battle that happens, and then the plague bodies get thrown over as weapons to kill people, and then the rich people in the caste system of the West get on their nice boats and get the hell out of there. I'm going back home, but then spread the plague so it's weird that in the caste system, the higher ups are the ones that are spreading it, because they're the only ones that have the money to trade silk and all the things that are coming from the East and bringing things from the West to go back to the East. And the Mongolians are the ruffians of the time, because the Mongolian Empire had split after Genghis Khan into multiple different sects too, and multiple different parts. And it's just so weird to me that we're seeing that now when the world comes too connected. Like, there is this clash that happens that it's weird, because I saw it fragments the East and the West. And it feels very much so now that you have, North Korea in with Ukraine and Russia, and then America, and then all the NATO countries, and then you have China that's trying to stay kind of neutral but not, and then you have Iran that's connected with North Korea, and then it becomes this, oh no.
And then meanwhile, all the people don't share the same perspectives about all the elites, right? Whatever is the elite concerns that are going on whatever level, and they're trying to say, here's what's happening, and you should really care about this. So then you have like 2% of the population that's watching those news channels and are just like, yes, that's how it is. But then all these other fractured beliefs of what's happening, and these new ways to understand what's going on, and these different reactions, because you could even see Luigi, that whole health thing,
right,
as it kind of reminds me of the Peasants' Rebellion in Martin Luther's time, where if you critique this structure of elite healthcare or people who don't care about others, I don't know, if you do that for so long, eventually people are going to rise up and take arms, and then people are going to back off, like, oh no, we shouldn't have
or French Revolution. It reminded me of that big time.
That's more that's where you really see that kind of thing. Yeah. But it can take off in so many different ways. So even in the era of revolutions.
That's why Trump just squashed that whole and said, this Luigi thing's horrible to do that, right? He's not even president yet, because you haven't even heard Biden talk about it. Right?
I know,
because it swelled up online that everybody's like, oh, I'm so happy to see a CEO died. And then there's people online saying, anybody who's a CEO, go kill them, right? Like, it's like, whoa. And that's to me, I was like, that's French Revolution. Like, anybody who's on the higher part of the caste system should be killed.
Yep.
Right? In society. But the same thing happened in the Black Plague, because if you think about it, it's like all these rich people are the ones trading, and then they all leave their boats, they all go to their countries. And then it's like, the people like down the line kind of survive and all the rich people don't. But it reminds me of COVID, where if you had a job in COVID and then they shut everything down, right? And you couldn't go to your job, and then there's no more work. You're worried about figuring out work and stuff, but there was all these like rich elite people on the news, like, they don't have any COVID shots here, so I'm going to drive up the coast, and I'm going to try and find them in San Francisco. I'm going to try and find them any CVS, and I will drive 800 miles to find the shot. You remember that? There was like 2 months of the rich people just going out to try and find it.
And it was sort of like,
right.
Oh, good, you have resources, and you're taking it from all the people that were being told
correct
need it the most.
And then it's so
but
weird.
They were doing it for other people.
Correct. And then the way to get into like the first company that banned people without the shot was that gym, Equinox. And I was like in New York, right? And then LA. And I'm like, this isn't, and I wrote to them, I'm like, you should drop your name. It's a spiritual, Equinox is a spiritual thing. And you guys are not being spiritual, right? And I was like,
still don't even
and so that's what's weird, is it's weird because it even says that they participated in the donating to the church and seeking ways to appease an angry God, which is so beyond Rome. There was that too, right? But that's like through sacrifice to, but it's that goes really deep into the Egyptian model. The only way to get through and past the underworld is you must have acquired enough wealth and gifts to give in order to make it to the afterlife. There's no other way. So Age of Taurus.
Well, couldn't you be a servant and be a servant in the afterlife? If you get mummified?
Yeah, but if you go down Nyx, right, and you get, that's a Roman idea, but that mixing with old ideas of the old dynasties and the old Egyptian way, it's like this idea that you have to go down the river and there's an offering, and that offering, though, from the Pharaoh's time of all those 12th dynasties on till we get almost close to AD, almost to when, it's the time where Rome and Egypt come together through Cleopatra's marriage, that it's that idea that you have to offer something physical to God, like you have to have something. But to me, it was never understood quite, and maybe I need to talk to a historian of Egyptian history, of like, so what, you die and like somehow the object transfers with you in your soul, like it just comes with you? Like this, so Age of Taurus, it's like this idea of Taurus, like it's gonna come with me. So if you're wearing a chain of gold, like it just, that goes with you, like
your whole chamber room.
Right. I guess that's where the tombs
it's
and
not the actual object. I think it's the essence.
Well, that's what's really weird is my Mars retrograde goes into that this Mars is bringing that up. The tombs, chambers, and mummification of also crocodiles and weird stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That we don't even know the idea of some of this Diddy stuff to all this stuff is about a totally different. To them, that's their penance that they're paying. A creepy way. Or it says the plague's devastation was so widespread and indiscriminate that it challenged simple moral explanations. Even devout church leaders, monks, nuns, and the pious lay people died in staggering numbers. So that's what's so interesting, is that it hits the whole caste system completely. And what's weird is that's what kind of COVID did too, right? You just see celebrities that are, and everybody, world leaders, doctors, nurses, people on the street. But what's weird is like the homeless population did well. People that were really not following it did better than people who were. So it's almost like the same thing. Like everybody who's devout into what's happening, and we're the way through. The church is going to save you. Everybody's dying. Yeah. That's in that. This made it hard to argue that only the ungodly were struck down. Instead, most people saw it as a communal trial or a warning that everyone holy and unholy alike needed to repent, rather than a direct signal that those who died were individually lacking in godliness. But that's what's interesting about, you didn't see that kind of as the message, right? It was more of like, this is part of life, and right, the idea of the wet market, and somebody there, and it's about, I can't believe these Chinese people eat bats. Nobody's talking in the Western world of like a spiritual or religious situation happening. Mm-hmm. It was a health problem. So that's where the new church is, the healthcare system in a way, which it's actually always been that because the Templar Knights are connected with that.
Will they become the Knights Hospitaller?
Right. Yeah. And then the Masons and Shriners and all that, they're all connected to the hospital system. So that's really what's really weird about the whole thing. But I think it's interesting that it's kind of weird because that's maybe what is missing a little bit is like, what's the spiritual lesson of how the world got corrupt? Because they're saying it's because the world, the morality, the corruption is happening, and that is what created it. And it's the aftermath of it that it's finally really more understood, because you're seeing nuns, you're seeing people of the cloth, you're seeing people that are higher up, or even the monks, they're dying of it too. And to get back to God's favor, but in this case, it's get back to the government's favor. Get back to your local government's favor.
Yeah, but I mean, I still always like to think of, so if you look at Nostradamus, for example, right, that he somehow survived the plague and his family didn't. And his answer was not, oh, well, then I must be the most pious guy. I'm going to go join the church.
Right.
He turned to his own spirituality or his own system, right? He was scrying and writing his prophecy. Like, he became a prophet himself. He was motivated to pursue his own work. And so many people were. I think this is what starts the period of time of the Renaissance, right?
Yeah.
That people now are able to actually find a little room to create their own thing. But the thing that's always what comes around, but I think, we don't see those kind of plague-worthy events very often. And I think, like what you show in the astrology that's coming up too, that connects back to, and we talked about this in our last show, to those times, thousands of years BCE, right? That we're experiencing a time that is one of those pivotal times where something completely new emerges. But what's interesting is after that time, slowly the old institutions reemerge, they reconfigure themselves. It's like the many-headed hydra where you cut off a head and then a new one eventually grows up. That, I don't know. It's
the hydra that goes across all the constellations and in the the maps. Yeah, that's the hydra that comes through from Capricorn, Ophiuchus, if you want to use that, Sag, all the way up to Leo, Cancer, and all that. The hydra.
So what is that? That's just sort of the way life is in our system. Is that the heads grow back? I don't know.
I think it's like, I'm trying to connect it with, like, now it's kind of more like, I look at it like by the signs of being like, there's always something to fear that's coming at the heart in love. And it's about whether you know how to quell that fear off within yourself, or give yourself to the hydra on the Capricorn institutional side and feel safe in that you're being protected not by a spiritual or comfort with spirit to take care of things, and you being in that space like a Nostradamus kind of way of doing it, or you're kind of running amok, trusting these institutions like people did back in 1347, 48, 49 during the Black Plague, and watching all the people in the church die. Mm-hmm. That actually is making the fear worse. So you already were scared. Then you're like, well, I'm giving my money and I'm giving all my penance and I'm giving everything to the church, and so it'll go away. And then it doesn't. And then the people that took your money are dead. Well, I think that would make your fear go quadruple. Or the same thing with the healthcare system. Well, they'll take care of it. They've got masks. They've got ventilators. And then anybody who got a vent died, right? Oh, well, they've got shots now and they're at CVS everywhere else. Oh, and people who get that, they don't work. I won't even go into the other stuff, right? Like, they don't work. So I think that made people probably really scared who were really sucked in and weren't finding that strength within themselves. But to have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1517 into 18 with Martin Luther, and then for us to have it in 2020 in Capricorn, is that hydra and where it heads toward the opposite side. And so now Pluto's kind of in where that Hydra goes. So it's kind of like an interesting moment. And then you have Hail Hydra happening at California universities, and a lot of the big healthcare, bio engineering of new health technologies really wanting to use the Hydra technologies of creating infinite life, like immortality. And so that's where the mRNA technology is the idea of the beginnings of that, to change genes out and swap them eventually with Hydra that can instantly regrow cells that have been dead. So that's where the beginnings started, through the whole idea of this gene therapy through stem cells, but Hydra's its own. Kind of creepy, looking at them. I'm sure you've seen them. That they'll reproduce dead cells, and like your heart will become a new heart. Like it will always just
I mean,
an infinite loop cycle, I guess.
Technology, right?
I think it's
those are great
scary.
Ideas in a perfect world, but the thing is that people put all the faith at the very beginning of these. Maybe we'd never have any new developments if someone wasn't extremely certain that whatever they're doing was going to lead to whatever they expect. Like Columbus was so convinced, I'm going to find this new route to India. I'm going. Bye, everybody. He gets there. It's not India. He finds this whole new place, and other explorers who had been there too, right?
And for gold. I'm going to get all the gold.
Yeah, he wants to find a route to get around the Ottomans and all of these other things that were getting in the way of getting to the riches fastest.
I know, tripping over Ottomans is really difficult.
He was trying to get around that obstacle course of the Ottomans. But anyway, he did. It's like progress does end up happening. He actually died, I think, on one of his voyages, right? He didn't get back. And so usually the people who are at the forefront, who are thinking, I'm going to go drive and get my shot, or I'm investing in this new technology and I'm going to use it myself. Like, I don't know. I'm having images of like those mad scientists in movies who are just like, like Frankenstein, I guess. I think I just keep thinking we're heading into the time of Dr. Frankenstein, because I know historically that's kind of the next, like these Gothic novels start to emerge, and there's this world in which you've got like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It's like this idea of the experimental science, and that one person's going to be able to control and bring life to new things. And it doesn't happen, right? That they either, like the plague, they end up spreading it themselves and they die and everybody else dies around them.
It's to me, it's Nutty Professor, original.
Yeah, but that was fun.
It wasn't though, because if you remember when he takes his own tonic, it turns, I don't know if you remember, he like turns into like an ape. So they show like an evolutionary process. And then of course he turns into I forgot the name. It's its name's so good. It's so good, that movie.
Like Debonair guy or Mr. Slow.
Yeah, his name. It's like the name. It's like so good. But, right? And then his voice comes back when he's singing. And then he has to do the whole big show at the college, right? And then he just lets it happen on stage and turns back into himself. And I like that better because there is no tonic that will make you this super part of yourself. And it's not who you really want to be. In the end of that movie, of course, he gets the girl and they start making the tonic, and then his dad steals the tonic from him. And because he's using it all the time, because he gets his suave kind of weird thing, because growing up, they show him as a baby, but as an adult, right? But he's a baby, of how his mother is controlling his father. Like he's not allowed to do anything. That is right. So that's why he's so limp when it comes to women. But then his dad takes it, and now he's finally free from his mother's grip. Right. So there is that Nutty Professor to me of like this idea of like, where am I lacking in myself that this thing's going to give me? And that's Dr. Frankenstein idea too.
But we saw that also with Queen Elizabeth in the discovery of witches, right? Where we talked about that. that when she's looking for the elixir of life, but then, she gets this advice that maybe because you're a monarch, you don't want to live forever because you aren't the monarch. The monarch is the institution or is the idea, and different people come through and become the monarch. And so, not everybody eventually gets to that place, but there are so many stories of, even the search for the Fountain of Youth happened in the early Spanish exploration times.
Buddy Love, that was the name.
What is it?
Buddy Love, that he turned into.
Are you talking about the Jerry Lewis version?
Yes,
or Eddie Murphy?
the Jerry. I would never use the Eddie Murphy. That was a horrible remake with the veterinarian and no. The school teacher who's the chemistry teacher. Jerry Lewis is the best in the world, and he just really wants to. And I just blew up the whole school. I'm so sorry. Right, and then he turns into Buddy Love. Yeah. Remember, he's like, hey, and he's smoking cigarettes, and every girl wants him, and he's like so narcissistic. But actually, they're saying that they actually used the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 1886 story integrated into that from Robert Stevenson's story into the movie.
I want to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on an episode.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is because in '63, right, it was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we had in Capricorn at the last degrees, but then that same cycle came, we had it in Aquarius, and in 1960, it wasn't person of the year or man of the year. They used to say man of the year for Time magazine. In that year, it was chemistry with beakers, 1960. So that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was about this idea of science and chemistry that was shifting, right? So it's weird because then that movie represents that idea and how it kind of falls short.
And isn't it interesting how we have that idea of chemistry, that it's something happening in a lab with beakers, and oh no, now actually our seeds and the food and everything, chemicals are everywhere around us.
Well, they've made them look different, right? You always saw the beakers and you always saw the blue liquid or something, and then now they look so nice and you don't see anything. It just looks like they're in a lab doing things and there's computers, and it just, you don't see the actual thing they're doing anymore. So they got rid of that because they're maybe not doing anything too. But that's what's really weird is he comes up with that himself and he takes it on himself. So it's kind of it's very individualized. It's not like what he's doing to somebody else. It's what he's doing to himself. He can't find in himself. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about, where people it's like this thing that people are looking for in themselves. Even I'll show that was the original poster, right? How he's like, please do not reveal the middle of this picture. Jerry's a mousy chemistry professor who invents the greatest drink since Dracula discovered Bloody Marys.
Interesting.
Right? What does he become? Well, any scientist who makes a girl like this can't be all mad.
Did he make her? I didn't remember that.
No, remember, because he's like, I'm gonna make you a star. The idea. It's funny because Jerry Lewis directed this movie too, but it becomes, what does he become? What kind of monster? Because he doesn't become a good person.
In the end, is he alone or does he end up?
No, he ends up with her. She loves him. She liked him before, right? She didn't like Buddy Love. But I think that's where kind of that's a more easier time if you think about it, and people are searching for something to deal with in these fear. He's actually not afraid of the doomsday, what it might be, because whatever it takes to get him to just not be himself, he's willing to take his own experiment to that far in order to be somebody he's not, to somebody he wants to be, even though he knows it makes him feel bad and it doesn't last long and he has to keep doubling up his doses and it's getting him into all these sticky situations, right? So that's what's weird is in times when there's not duress, people are still kind of the prophecies are a little bit different. They're not, and that's what I find funny is that maybe it's not funny, but it's kind of interesting to me. It's in these moments of duress that becomes an extreme in the world, it's when people flock to what was in front of them the whole time. The religion or whatever, and thinking, well, now is the time that I have to. So it's like people kind of wait, like, well, if there's an Antichrist, maybe when it shows up, then I'll do it. So you get a world-changing event, and that's when people start to flock. And then you see all the events happening that kind of cascade after, which is like after the volcano, it's the lava coming through the town that people are starting to be like, okay, I'll do, yeah, whatever. I'm getting baptized, or I'm doing this. And that's where we're at. And that's like repeating, but then what's scary is then it kind of morphs into now you're not on our team, so you're part of what got me into this place because you're on the outside. You're not with the one way but even though all around the world everybody's going into it their own way.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's never been a moment where the world became one religion. I would say if you look at like Alexander the Great, it wasn't about that everybody had to follow the religious order of Alexander the Great. Like when he went through the Middle East, he didn't try to change the religion.
Right.
So the only time that really the world was conquered from west to east, and probably the most conquering of all time was Alexander the Great. He didn't change their religions. He let them be who they were. He just wanted to conquer them and say, hey, I'm the emperor.
Yeah, I mean, any empire that lasts a long time allows people to maintain their own culture and figures out a way to get them to pay into the bigger state, right? And then it can be maintained. But for some reason, we keep getting people who think, no, I can create an empire that rules everybody under one ideology. And it never works.
No.
So...
No, and I think that's a good way to kind of like end this look is like these fears are a loop, and they are looped in. We showed really good connections from the Renaissance period and the beginnings of these stories and these books, right? And then they get really involved, and when you see big, I would say the schism of the Catholic and the Church of England is probably with Martin Luther teamed up with that. It's kind of a piggyback job. Is like. It's impacted the world today fully. Like the idea, like what would the world look like without that moment? There would be no pilgrims probably the way that it was. There would have never been any of this shift. And if we lived in a world where it was really just the prominent Catholic Church as the Christian religion, and everybody's still following just that version, and the Pope didn't get checked by Martin Luther, how far could the Pope have gone? Because going back to Charlemagne's time and looking at 800s and looking at that time when you finally saw the head of the Catholic Church also be the ruler of the lands, right? That's actually the deeper meaning of why the founding fathers of America didn't want to see it. They're using the King of England, of course, as the example. They don't talk about it in the Declaration of Independence, but it's the ideas that are founded upon that of this idea that you can't be the king and the head of the church at the same time. But that actually goes back to the Charlemagne times of watching crown and king come together, which is pre-England and pre the whole entire West. Like it really is the moment there. Mm-hmm. That what would the world look like if it was that way? It never did split.
Yeah.
And it centralized because, and then, yeah, the holy wars do come after all that, and no side really wins.
Mm-hmm. So are we going to learn that lesson? No side wins in the Holy Land? I mean,
I would say no. I mean, if you look at the history, it just constantly, because I would say maybe so if you would see centuries of peace there. You don't. And even right now, the Jewish state that's Israel today it's not been in a safe place, right? Whether you live in Israel or you're in Palestine, because that's part of being, the occupying energy of that area, right? That they decide what's happening in that area. Or the West Bank, or all these other areas. It's a very contentious place. It's not there's Iron Dome, right? So it's not a safe place. It's not And I think that's where maybe, it's kind of hard looking at the history. It's kind of like there is this kind of, okay, let's not deal with this anymore. And it does kind of feel like that's coming. Even I just saw this whole Syrian conflict. Now Israel just took out a bunch of sites in Syria's whole military, even though the rulership now is the people, the rebels in Syria. And I just saw Netanyahu out in Syria, like out on the land in Syria with all his main troops pointing at land to go take over. And I was like, I hate to use the astrology history, but it looked kind of like, and it looks a little Hitlerish. That's the Hitler moves, of the astrology. And I'm not saying that that's what he's doing, but being real without offending anybody or being anti-Semitic or anything.
Well, when you're taking over
it really is
because you think you have a claim to it.
Correct.
And
yes.
Some kind of ideology.
I know. And it's hard to say that, but it's
just looking at what is happening without labeling anybody.
Correct. I think when you study history and you do study astrology and you're using astrology and then you're using history, you can't go, okay, well, all right, like that person's that person because they're not the same people. You can't, all right? But when you're using reoccurrences in astrology and especially using the Uranus transit of Taurus right now and then mixing it in with the Mars retrograde and how it's happening opposite of Pluto, the same way that it happened opposite now to 1939 and in August 39, the month before World War II, and you start looking at those kind of images and the way things are happening, it's like that, that's what's a little bit odd to me. Is like you kind of have as the marker. It's like who's invading other lands, who's taking over territories, who's bombing other places, kind of without stopping, and that's the place that it's happening. So it's really weird that it would be the flip of exactly what the Jewish people went through. But again, it's not against Jewish people. There's something about this that has a weird, like you would never expect it would be that direction, but it is at the moment. So, I don't know. I mean, to me to see that in Syria, I kind of needed to see the Syrian thing to kind of go, why are you there now?
Yeah.
Like, so that adds to a really weird moment, I think, for the world. But I think that's where, right, the idea we showed in the Black Plague of like, well, what do you mean the church and look at all the nuns are dying and all these priests and all these people that are, and it's kind of that moment where it would be like a mind bender for people. Like, what do you mean? Like, why would they do that? Like, what?
But we don't need to worry about that because there are witch drones descending upon America, and we need to worry about that. I was just trying to tie it back to our theme. And because I love the image that you created so much.
I know, and I'm sorry if I took this into that uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable place to talk about, but it really is kind of, because for me, it's like, oh, wow, that's a little hard to comprehend. Mm-hmm. The history that's been built upon why everybody's living there now, and now you would never expect it to be, and I'm not saying it is, but it is kind of an odd.
It is.
Like there is no other world leader at this time on lands with all of his generals pointing at land and bombing. There is no other leader doing that. Not even Zelensky. Or Putin. You don't see Putin on the battlefield. Right? So,
when's the last time?
So the last time we saw with Uranus and Taurus, the head leader of a country and a military on a battlefield was Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Yeah, sometimes you'll see presidents visiting the troops behind the lines, but they're never out in front. So
that happened yesterday.
Interesting.
I almost didn't believe it when I saw it. Like it was one of those things. I'm like, wait, what? Am I seeing what I'm seeing right now?
I don't know. You know, when you see those sorts of things, and a lot of us are seeing events unfold in the world, and I know we need to stop. We've gone over our timer, I think, but it's just what I always start to think about is, well, for those of us who see what's going on, and if you can see the astrology too, and other astrologers are seeing, I mean, I don't know if other astrologers are seeing it in the way that you do, but what can we do? Like, right? You know, you're not able to advise the president, or, like what power do we even have in this sort of situation?
I mean, the power we had was where to vote.
Yeah.
Right. So that was what was really interesting is in Michigan, a lot of people that were for the Palestinian aspect didn't put their delegates in for Kamala Harris. And Trump said, I don't want any wars. And the RFK said that as an independent presidential candidate, and then joined forces with Trump and said he had three reasons. And one of them, the top one, was to end the wars. Mm-hmm. So we all made our choice. And I chose, I don't want war. Mm-hmm. So now you have to put that trust in. The only thing that you can do at this moment, because if you look at it, you have the ICC against Netanyahu, but then you also have these other big humanitarian organizations putting out their stuff. But, Israel's not part of those courts, neither is America, right? So, in some other countries. But it's okay, you can't really do anything in this moment. You have to see if, is Trump going to be smart and not be the Mussolini who kind of wants to be oh yeah, hey, right? Mm-hmm. But what's weird is that's where the Mussolini thing was weird, because if you think about when Mussolini and his fascist state took over Italy, when the Germans came in, there was a moment where the Pope wasn't in full control of all of the cardinals and everything, and Mussolini came in and convinced a couple cardinals for the Nazis to come in and take some of the stuff out of the libraries in the Catholic Church as they were doing their discoveries for ancient relics around the world. So it kind of is this weird, I don't know. It's all very religious. So that's the theme that pops up again as we've turned into a religious world, and it's not going to be about left versus right, but what side of religion you're on. Because I was thinking about, I was saying this with Natalie, and then I was saying this, maybe with you too. It was the world was not determined by your political party, but your religious part. Are you for the Catholic Church, or are you for the Church of England, or are you for Protestant or, Catholic? And then there's the idea of Roman Catholic, became a thing, right? Because it's there's all these, it's we're moving into that. Are you Christian or not? In America, it's kind of are you Christian? And that's kind of tied to the party, which I think Christianity is going to overrule Republican or even MAGA. Well, I think the same as not religious is going to rule over the left.
Well, I think that's what happens. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing happening. The more that people try to turn philosophies into religions, or health choices into religions, the more that becomes something that's indoctrinated, and that you have to act in particular ways to show your commitment to that belief system, which is a very religious way of behaving. The more that's happening, that's where I think people are retreating into actual religions, because it's a way out where you get to be a part of something, or you get to feel that you're a part of something bigger than the political ideologies or that imposed religion. I mean, that's what's so interesting about the former Soviet Union. When they were the Soviet Union, there was no religion. It was supposed to be all about communism, Stalin. And the state was the religion. But as soon as the wall came down, and now we Russia is this big Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? They're religious. Or Putin will talk about religion. And I keep thinking, how did that happen? So there's something about, because you, I kept on.
The policies of the country in religion and what the executive of that country is making the laws based upon that religion. So like Putin's like against trans, right? He's against gay couples. So there was just in the last 3 weeks, like all the gay bars and stuff were just raided by Russian police and so forth. So they're all being made off that Orthodox viewpoint. So what's really interesting is you're seeing that across the world, including in the Middle East to Israel to now America, right? Like a lot of it's like, well, that's not Christian. So they only go off the Christian ideology. They're not going off of, well, it's America. It's freedom of religion. So I think that's where America is going to have its hardest battle is like choosing allies off religious backings instead of being neutral and being like, well, is this good for humanity or not? Like just like without the religious emotional part. And Kamala Harris didn't show that she was part of any of she was for the religious side. She made that clear. Like, no, I'm going to be that part.
She said she was for it because
remember she said she was for Israel and she was back Israel, right? And so she wasn't putting out a card saying, "Oh no, I'm going to look at this from a neutral place, not a religious place." Both her and Trump. So it didn't matter who you voted for. Both sides were going to support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I was going to say, except that I was just saying Kamala lost a lot of support because she didn't go to the Catholic dinner, right?
Right.
Or she lost some momentum. I don't know how much it impacted her, but that was definitely a moment that was played against her in a lot of places.
Well, and I think the archdiocese of that dinner was at Notre Dame. I don't know if you saw him, but he was in the front at Notre Dame.
Oh, was he there?
Yeah, he was there.
But I didn't connect that was him. But, geez, I just forgot it again. I thought, okay, wait, what I was going to say was, and then I totally forgot. So I don't remember.
We were just talking about Kamala and Trump, and
yeah, and
the both of them were supporting.
Yeah, I just don't remember exactly. I was going to go back to the beginning of our whole show, and now I can't remember. So we're going to end on a question mark, I guess.
When I think that we can still be very surprised over this Pluto and Aquarius of, right, like a dramatic shift from Henry VIII against the Catholic Church was like shakeable to the core of every single human being that was alive at that time that could have heard the message and known about it. Because it would have shook any Catholic, it would have shook everybody in England, it would have shook French people, it would have shook Spanish people, it shook everybody. Like, what? Wait, what? Did I hear you right? It would have been I don't think so, that's no way. But it did happen. So it's kind of one of those moments where it's like, is Trump going to cut the ties with a religious backed country? Because it gets to a line of where what I like about the Revolutionary War, especially the American Revolutionary War, is it wasn't about religion. It was just about God, and it was more about people, and it was about people that they have their divine laws and divine rights that are God-given rights, and it wasn't about all of the. There is not one place in any of the writings, anything in the religious texts involved with American creation of the Republic. Like nothing. It's not like any of the symbolism of it. There's no cross. There is no, in Christian tradition today, like some saying out of the Bible, some verse, nothing like that. Nothing anywhere. And I think it's because those higher part of the caste system of the founders were Freemasons. Mm-hmm. And what's good, what I think is the positive is that we know that Trump's not really a religious person. Like he's not dying to go to church. He can't even hold the Bible up the correct way.
in front of the church.
And I think that's where, he's a truth sayer, but he's not a truth sayer to everybody. To get the votes, he will play the Christian role as much as he can. But when it comes down to it, he's not thinking about religion. Only when votes matter. Or he's got to convince a congressman or a senator.
Yeah, but he's not disrespectful against it either.
Correct, he's not. So
it's interesting. It's so funny to me how the very beginning of this time now, this new era of Trump, was the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening. That was the weirdest thing. And also, I mean, the thing that was very funny about it, or strange, is that the United States has a national cathedral that was built, right, in Washington, D.C., and it is Episcopalian, which is Church of England's American version. But there's not an official religion, right, in our country.
Or the Temple of the Mormons in D.C. that just got rebuilt that's huge.
And everyone can have their own temple or important center.
Yeah, the Quaker House in D.C.
I just thought of what I was going to say, actually. What's really interesting is also Trump has attempted to appointed into important positions. I don't know if everybody's been approved or how that all is going or how it works, but he has 3 Hindu people that he has appointed or selected, right? Tulsi Gabbard. Is Kash Patel, did I read that, or is he, I thought that I saw that somewhere. And
for FBI director, and her for the head of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So I just think that's interesting because
Vivek is technically like a side project. It's not an official capacity. They have to convince all the senators and the House representatives to make the changes.
But to try to bring in people who are from a truly diverse perspective, because we haven't really seen that central. Even though Kamala was, I think her mother was Hindu, right? Or am I wrong about that? I don't know enough, but it's really interesting that she played down that side of herself in the election. That wasn't the big thing we heard. But this is a different religious identity that we don't see in the center of government so much in our country.
But extremely surrounding every part of it.
What do you mean?
Like whether it's, AIPAC and all the Israel money that comes in, there's always a representative from Israel for every congressman and senator, or the Christian element that comes from all sides, whether it's Tucker Carlson or any of them that are surrounding and also feeding all the information out that are Benny Johnson, all of them are all using Christ as the way in every post and every situation about politics. So it's weird that inside it might not, those people didn't talk about, but Pete Hegseth every other sentence is because of the Savior of my Lord, that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where it's like, it is kind of in there.
Well, I think that's partly Trump's trying, it is, like I was saying, it's interesting that you've got this religious ceremony that was the beginning of us seeing Trump again on the world stage. And I do think that he has respect for different religious beliefs. I don't know. I'm wondering what people think about that. I haven't seen him putting down different religions, but maybe he does. But that by appointing 3 people who are not Christian, they're not Jewish, they're not Protestant, they're not Roman Catholic, right? That he's bringing in these different voices, whatever people think about them. But I do think that sets a precedent for trying to make space for other views. Or it's just interesting going into this time with what you've talked about for religion in this time, because I think of when we talked about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and we talked about the Quakers, right? That they were that third outsider group that actually even came in and tried to lobby the president. Remember that there was the one Quaker couple who just said, we're going to D.C. and we're going to meet with the president. And back then you could just show up.
Right.
And they got to meet with the president and talk to him about why peace was an important option. So
or converting the Native Americans to Christianity was a bad idea, and that, thank God, didn't happen in America. It almost did, though. that was going to be the idea that was stirring through Congress and stirring through the president's ears. And it was the Quakers who convinced the president, and at the time convinced everybody. You guys wanting to do what the Spanish did to the Aztecs? I think with Saturn Neptune meeting in Aries, that's they don't meet in Pisces. They get so close. So right now it looks like there's going to be this like unified religious front, but there's going to be somebody who schisms out. And if there is anybody to do it, it would be America. So it's going to look like it's not, though, for a while. But at the end of the day, we always think of regime changes, and I'll end with what if he chooses to do a regime change in Israel? Because you're right, Trump is cool with the head crown princes of Saudi Arabia. He's been to Jerusalem, moved the whole embassy, right? He's been to the Catholic Church with the Pope. So he's in with the Christians, and he always says the evangelicals, right? So and now he got the whole movement of the Amish to, right? So it's he is kind of like, I'm just cool with everybody, whatever. And you can't say China has one, because in China it's communist, so it's President Xi, right? And they have all the Uyghur camps with all those Muslims that are in there, over 1 million of them. So, right? And then he understands the way that Putin thinks. Like, oh, he's pretty hard alt-right, religious or alt-right leader. Follows the religious order to rule. So he knows how to like say the lines that keep maintenance in that category without taking them full stance. So that is kind of a chess game, but
I think what people, what I see is then people worry about, okay, but Vance is extremely religious, but I don't know enough about him to know whether that's actually true or not, or if that's just a fear.
I think, he's born to a Hindu wife, and he's another one who is a hillbilly who has been through everything from drugs to all the things, and will make the choice that at the end of the day isn't going to be about pleasing a religion, but what's the right thing to do at the end of the day.
But there's a lot of fear about it.
I'm sure that's why he picked him, though.
Yeah. Oh, it's me, so I don't
well,
have anything else
we can
to
end
say.
that, but I think that's a lot for people to kind of overall think about.
I think so.
Yeah, so they always come up. I think maybe the lesson is maybe there is no lessons for people to take on their own. But I think my advice, don't take it, but my advice is, find a way to quell the fear first within yourself before you're living your life in fear of what the divine's going to do, when it's more like enjoying the beautiful way the divine is opening doors in your life, when you're not in fear, but in trust with God, divine, and wherever you connect that religious wise or not.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. I think that's the best thing to get from all of this.
Yeah. So, well, that was fun, Ann. Thank you. And make sure that you join us on highvibe.tv for all the shows. And hope you all have good holidays. This show will be back after Christmas. So appreciate you all. We always love comments down below, and let us know what maybe you guys have some cool astrology history stuff you want us to cover. We're always down for it. And see you on highvibe.tv. Adios. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Are you ready to experience the most transformative cosmic event of 2025. Mars Retrograde is not just a celestial phenomenon, it's a profound call to reset, rethink, and redefine your understanding of power and purpose. But this time, it's different. This Mars Retrograde will hit in ways we've never seen before. Join David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, a world-renowned celebrity astrologer, for an exclusive live event streaming on High Vibe TV. This isn't just another astrology event. It's an immersive experience that dives deep into the astrological and personal implications of this rare Mars retrograde. You'll gain insights and tools to fully embrace this cosmic shift and transform your life. David will guide you through the unique placements of Leo and Cancer during this Mars retrograde, the rare and impactful Pluto opposition, and much more. As always, expect special surprises and exclusive revelations that only the Leo King delivers. Discover how Mars retrograde impacts every area of your life, your love life, career, manifestation, and direction. Learn how to turn its challenges into opportunities for personal empowerment. Gain a new understanding of power, both personal and global, and how to truly harness it for your own growth. Have questions? You'll get the chance to ask David live during the Kanda session, or send your questions in advance to pr@highvibe.tv. Don't miss this opportunity to connect with the cosmos, understand its messages, and align yourself with the energy of the year ahead. From the Mars perspective, this is the beginning of a long period of Aries influence, and understanding it now is critical. Save the date, December 12th, 2024, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Streaming live exclusively on High Vibe TV. Reserve your spot today. Click below to join this one-of-a-kind live stream and embark on your cosmic reset. Premium Plus subscribers get this event included with their subscription. For others, the event is $19.99. Whether you join live or watch the recording added to your library, this experience will empower you for what's to come.